We continue now in Masechet Shabbat, in the Mishna Shabbat, chapter 16, that speaks about fire on Shabbat. We've already covered more or less the laws of how to deal with the fire today. We said you just put it out, call the firefighter right away. But I showed you how in the halacha you still have voices that are trying to be reserved and say don't go overboard for fear that you're going to transgress Shabbat, and that's a shame. It's lamentable because it could cause problems. Especially, it's interesting because when we spoke about the laws of extinguishing fire on Shabbat, we mentioned that this is considered an act that is not punishable unless it produces something positive. Right? Unless you put out a fire in order to make charcoal, it's not punishable. So just putting out a fire to save life, that should be a mitzvah. But anyway, here's an interesting thing. I find it amazing that a modern book such as Yalkut Yosef, written in the 20th century by Rabbi Yitzhak Yosef, who is now the chief rabbi of Israel, brings the following thing regarding fire. That's before we move to the next Mishnah. An advice on how to put out fire. It says, "Mipi hashmu'a, mipi mekubal, shekibel merabo." He says, I heard a rumor from a Kabbalist who heard from his rabbi. So, very reliable source, right? Sgula nifla'a le'archik ha'esh ma'ashchuna. There's a wonderful trick, they call it segula, like a magical thing, right? To remove fire from the neighborhood. What is it? To take the robe of a woman who is menstruating and there's blood on it, and with this soiled garment, they should put it on the house across from where the fire is. Yeah? And that house will be protected. Can you imagine that? Yeah. This is just mind-boggling to think that anyone would write that and to give people, who knows, someone is going to read this book and keep a couple of garments like that at home, and whenever there's a fire, he's going to go and hang it out on the walls and the windows and sit there and wait for the house to be burned down, because this is what's going to happen. Anything else is just complete nonsense. And not only that, they add Bishnat Taf Memvav Het Kislev. It says actually they have a date, the 8th of Kislev of the year 446 in the Hebrew calendar, which is about 1586. Naflad leka bevet akum ba'ir Rigio keneged Hatzach HaYehudim. A fire started in a house, a non-Jewish house in the city of Rigio in Italy, facing the Jewish neighborhood, and they did this gula. They put it. It's not clear if they put one robe or they put it all over the neighborhood, but immediately the fire stopped and everybody was saved. So, just saying, don't even think that works. It doesn't work, and just surprising that this would be included in the book of halacha that tells people the laws of putting out fire on Shabbat. Anyway, we're now in Mishnah Het, the 8th Mishnah of chapter 16, which deals with a very important concept and cause also problem on Shabbat, and that is asking a non-Jew to do work for you on Shabbat. So the Mishnah doesn't deal with it directly, saying you're allowed to ask, you're not allowed to ask. It comes at the heels of the discussion of fire on Shabbat, because there, the Mishnah said that if a non-Jew comes and attempts to put out the fire, you don't get involved. You don't say to stop or continue, and you're even allowed to say, whomever helps will not lose, and you could pay after Shabbat. But here they talk about actions that are done on a regular basis, not to save life. And it says, "Nochi sheidlik et haner, mishtamesh leoro Israel." If a non-Jew lit a candle on Shabbat, the Jew could use the light of that candle. Ve'im bishvil Yisrael asur, but if he did it for the Jew, it is forbidden. Mileh mayim lashkot behemto, mashkeh harav Yisrael, ve'im bishvil Yisrael asur. If he drew water from the well to give to his animal in a place where there's no eruv, so the water in the well are considered in another property, not that of the where the troughs are. So the Jew can give water to his animal, but if he did it for the Jew, he cannot use the water. The final example, asa goy kevesh lered bo, yored harav Yisrael. If a non-Jew made a ramp to disembark from a ship, the Jew could use it. But if he did it for the Jew, it's forbidden. מעשה ברבן גמליאל וזקנים שהיו באים בספינה ועשה גוי כבש לרד בו וירדו בו רבן גמליאל והזקנים. The Rabban Gamliel and the elders were traveling in a ship on Shabbat. The ship docked and the non-Jew made a ramp and they all disembarked from the ship. So it seems that they can use it. And it's interesting because the Gemara, the Talmud later says that it depends. If even if the non-Jew did it for himself and the Jew uses it, but if the non-Jew knows the Jew and is friendly with him, the Jew cannot use it because we fear that in the future he will do more for him to benefit him. So how would they explain the story of the ramp? If you make a ramp to disembark from the ship, whoever made the ramp was on the ship, knows very well the passengers. So the answer, this is because with the ramp, it's one action. You cannot make more. With candles, you light one candle, you see that he enjoys it, you make another candle, or you draw more water, but here it's a limited scope of the action. So that's what we have in the Mishnah. When it translates to halacha, to everyday practice, it becomes a little complicated. The main question is, what is the root of that prohibition? What is the root of the prohibition of in using work that was performed by a non-Jew on Shabbat? And so first we have to realize it's not in any way disrespectful to the non-Jew, but rather, if you ask him to do that, it's because he does not follow the same laws or observance that we do. So he is allowed to do that. It's not just saying, there is something that is beneath me and I'm asking you to do it. It's just something that according to my beliefs I cannot do, but according to your belief, you can. That is the core. This is how it should be approached. There is a dispute in the halacha whether this whole concept of asking a non-Jew, let's say that now we are talking here about someone who already did that, and even so, the rabbi said don't use it. Why? Not because it is forbidden per se, but because we're afraid that you're going to ask him in the future. So the real problem is with asking someone directly to do work for you on Shabbat. That is the core problem, right? So there is dispute between the commentators whether it is a biblical prohibition or a rabbinical prohibition. Meaning, does the Torah forbid it, or is it allowed according to the Torah, but the rabbis added another layer of prohibition? And what does it matter? It matters for situations where there's an emergency, or there's need, or any other reason for which you say we might bend the laws a little bit. So you bend the laws more when it's a rabbinical thing, but not when it's biblical. So some say it is biblical, some rabbinical. Those who say it's biblical, where do they take it from? They take it from the Ten Commandments, where the Torah says that you must rest on Shabbat, you and all that is yours. Your children, because the family used to work in the farm as well, everybody worked. So your children should rest, your animals should rest, and also the servant, the maidservant, and the sojourner who live with you and work for you, they should all rest on Shabbat. So from that, the rabbis concluded, if they are not supposed to work on Shabbat, so you cannot derive benefit from their work on Shabbat. But there's one caveat in this argument, which is that the Torah was not speaking of hired work or of volunteers. The Torah was speaking of a situation of slavery. because at the time of the Torah, slavery was still practiced, and that was the main way to have people working for you. The exception is sometimes you have hired work, and the Torah mentions it when speaking of the slave who was being set free. The Torah says, "Ki Mishna sechar sachir avadecha sheshanim." You must give great reward, a bonus to the slave when he is freed after 6 years, because he worked double the time of an employee. An employee works only during the day; he worked the day and night. He was always at your disposal. But when you look through the Tanakh, you will see that the cases of people who are hired to perform a certain work are very rare, and most of the people who perform work are either slaves or people who work for their own sake, or there would be one type of work which is performed as a barter deal, like the famous construction of the temple, where there was a deal between Hiram, the king of Tyre, and Shlomo, the king of Israel. So, why does it matter now whether it's slavery or not? The Torah speaks from the point of view of slavery, which, by the way, in parenthesis, the Torah sought to abolish slavery, and eventually it did. It was not accepted among Jews to own slaves, but it didn't go directly against it, because Hashem knows that it was not easy for people to let go of slavery. So instead, the Torah created a set of laws that slowly will wean people from that mentality of owning slaves. And the most important thing that you could say that Hashem did with Am Yisrael to educate us that owning slaves is wrong is the exile in Egypt. After we spent time in Egypt and we have witnessed what it means to be a slave, the Torah constantly tells us, remember that you were a slave in Egypt, meaning you don't want to treat others the way you were treated. You know how bad it is. So that's in parentheses. Now, when there was a situation of owning slaves, the concept was that the master owns the slave the way he owns the animal. In terms of not God forbid to say that that the slave is not human, but in terms of the animal being an extension of the master's property, and the slave also an extension of the master's property. Therefore, on Shabbat, all should rest. And the master cannot tell his slave, I want you to do this thing for me. And that worked well in the social context of the Torah. But then when you move forward, the time of the Torah, the destruction of the first temple in the 6th century before the Common Era, then they spent time in Bavel, then they came back, then the Greeks conquered Eretz Israel in the 3rd century before the Common Era. Now, there's a new reality. Most people don't own slaves, but rather are contractors, employees, hired hands, and also another huge change in the makeup of Israeli society. Whereas before, most of the cities had only Jewish residents, and it was not very common to live side by side with non-Jews, or if they were there, they were not of the same status. Now, that's from about the 2nd century BCE and on, there were mixed cities all over Israel of Greeks, Jews, and people from all over the region living together. And there is a whole tractate in the Mishna called Masechet Avodah Zarah, the laws of idolatry, that speaks about all the conflict that people had when they lived in those mixed cities, because they lived, the synagogue is side by side to a pagan temple. So of course you're not going to go into the temple, but even when you go to the bathhouse, there are statues all over. Even when you want to drink water from the fountain in the city, in the plaza, the fountain is in the form of a statue of an idol. So the Mishnah says, can you put your mouth by the next to the fountain to drink water? It seems like you kiss the statue. So when they had this kind of conflicts, people lived together. But so one of the problems that it sort of created was that now people had non-Jewish neighbors whom they could ask for help, and they're not an extension of their own property. their own entity. They do things independently and consciously, not because they were told to do. They could choose not to do that, and it doesn't matter whether they're paid for it or not, because even when you are paid for a job, it's your choice whether to accept it or not, and in many cases, it's also your choice when to do it and how to do it. There is flexibility. So technically, and that is the most important law that we have to know about asking a non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbat. Technically, not just technically, biblically, you could ask a non-Jew who either is a friend who is doing you a favor, or even someone that you're paying for his services, you could ask him to do anything on Shabbat by biblical law. And for a while, this sort of like went under the radar until the rabbis became concerned, because they realized that with that new sort of like gap or loophole in the biblical law, you could do anything on Shabbat. Run your business, right? You take you tell your friends, your partners, your employees. Partners is different, but you tell your friends or your employees, okay, I'm not going to be here from Friday at sunset till Sunday, but you know what you need to do, and maybe you'll be even more detailed. Do this, do that. So if you go, you do Kabbalat Shabbat, you have the first meal, you go to sleep. You wake up in the morning, you go to the synagogue. You have the second meal, you go to sleep. You wake up, and you have your 3 meals, the tefillot and everything. Meanwhile, your business runs as usual. Who can say anything? It's okay according to the Bible.
But the money he made, you cannot give it to tzedakah or something like that?
No, but there's no prohibition of doing it, so the money is also kosher, according to the Torah. According to the Torah. And even today, by the way, there is no prohibition of making money on Shabbat. If there was a prohibition, people should have frozen all of their bank accounts on Friday and reactivate them. And they have to take into account the timeline in Australia, because somewhere in Shabbat, someone might be breaking Shabbat for you. So you have to stop doing any financial activity for 36 hours or more. And then you have problems of websites. Yes, there are religious people who shut down their websites on Shabbat. But if they do that, they have to shut it down for 36 hours, like I said. And they have to, everything that they have investments in stocks or it's very complicated. So there's no prohibition of money being made on Shabbat as long as you yourself did not actively do something which is forbidden on Shabbat. Even if you tell a non-Jew to do it for you. But the rabbis here intervened, and they created this decree of saying, don't tell the non-Jew to do something for you on Shabbat, because they wanted to preserve the nature of Shabbat and make sure that people know that the business, even the business and commercial activity, they also take a break for one day, which is extremely important. However, because we know that this is where it comes from, we understand why it is okay to say sometimes, to ask for something indirectly, right? So now you understand when we tell someone, it's cold here, and he's going to turn on the heat, right? We're not cheating anyone. It's not like we're breaking the law. We have to have in mind that the biblical law allows us to do that, and out of respect for that, for the spirit of Shabbat, we say it indirectly. And we do it because we need to feel comfortable on Shabbat. So that's called a necessary thing. When it's done in order for your pleasant feeling on Shabbat, either warm or to save it from hot weather, you would need to turn on the AC, to make someone who's not feeling well a little more comfortable. All these things are allowed. Also, when it's a tzorech mitzvah, for the sake of a mitzvah, let's say in the context of the synagogue, or the tzorech rabim, for the community, it's going to help many people, you're allowed to do that. And then another qualification of that decree of the rabbis is that you cannot tell a non-Jew to do directly stuff for you only when it's a biblical prohibition. But if you even indirectly, you don't tell him unless there's a need, or if the prohibition is a rabbinical one and not a biblical one. So this is called Tarte de Rabbanan. You're asking a non-Jew is one rabbinical prohibition, and you ask him to do something which is anyway only prohibited by the rabbis, so they say it's fine. But all those ways to sort of bypass the law were created by the same rabbis who made the decree. So in no way we are bypassing them, but rather we're following the openings that they left for us when there is a need, because they understood that if you completely forbid it, people will run into problems. So I wrote an article a while ago, when everybody was up in arms when Ivanka and Jared were driven to the synagogue on Shabbat, and everybody was saying, "Wow, who gave them the permission? Who does that? Where does it from?" So, but the point is, they're asking a non-Jew to do that for them when it is what we call the need of the community, because it's a public figure and the danger they cannot be out in the open. If it were an electric car, it would be better, because even without great need, it's only rabbinical prohibition. But interesting enough, I know of one case where the chief rabbi Haim Ovadia actually ruled exactly the same way, and that is when he visited Los Angeles years ago in the synagogue where I was the rabbi, Kahal Yosef. There was the Hazan used to drive to the synagogue, and there were people who wanted to remove the Hazan, and they said, when the chief rabbi Haim Ovadia visited the synagogue, they complained to the rabbi. They said, we don't like that. The Hazan is driving to the synagogue on Shabbat. It is inappropriate. And the funny thing, a lot of them were also driving to Shabbat, but they wanted the Hazan represent them to be like a. So the Rabbi Eliyahu spoke with the Hazan, and he saw that he's actually the glue that holds everybody together. He founded the synagogue. He got people around him. So he said to those who complained, he says, instead of you're trying to remove him, no, he should stay. And I think he still serves, Ad V'Yisrael. He said, have someone drive him on Shabbat. So the guardian of the synagogue the custodian used to go pick him up on Shabbat and return him 2 or 3 times. So there you go. If people ask who was the rabbi who allowed Ivanka Trump and Jared to do that, Mordechai would probably also agree with that. Okay, Amen.